You're listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast, episode 46. Vincent, Paronnaud, and Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis. Okay, I'm really excited for this episode, and I want to take a whole bunch of stuff to say right off the top, because
wow, you're not even gonna say hi. How are you?
We'll
Have
get
you
there
been the last couple of weeks?
We'll get there in a second. No, this is really funny because pleasantries aside, I've had this like full circle moment that I've like been really excited about all week, because our guest for today is a gentleman by the name of Kaveh Taherian. And the great thing about this is he reached out once, initially I guess through our Instagram, through a mutual friend.
Yeah, Rob Michaels is our mutual that I know.
We don't need to name his name because we're not our friends with. No, I'm just kidding. He's fine. He's a great guy.
That piece of shit.
But discovering Kaveh and his work and his podcast, which we'll touch on briefly, I like went from like not knowing him to like listening to his podcast to becoming a full-fledged fan of 500 Tabs. To the point where like I became a bit of like a weird fan and genuinely excited about meeting him like a fanboy would, because now I'm at the place where I'm like, oh my God, he's going to be on our show. It's like this whole thing started because he reached out to us to talk about. Anyways, so let me do a quick bio. First of all, as you always remind me, Farhan, Durud bar shoma dustana aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we talk all things Iranian film, cinema, art, animation, directing, lilies in the bras, and cultural revolutions. What else do we talk about, Farhan?
Mangy dogs.
Mangy dogs owned by Ukrainian landlords. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
And with us today, quick little bio. Contrary to popular belief, Kaveh Taherian is a human being who was born and raised on planet Earth. Actually, that's where I'm from too. Cool. A creative multi-hyphenate who refuses to be confined to a single medium or consistent paycheck. He has built his career as a cartoonist, podcaster, and filmmaker. He currently lives in Los Angeles, where his clients include Apple TV+, HBO, and Nickelodeon. And he is also the co-host of a very, very great podcast called 500 Tabs. It's 500 Tabs or 500 Open Tabs?
500 Open Tabs.
I'm guessing. 500 Open Tabs.
Yeah.
Which I describe as it's a great combination of like two of my favorite podcasts that I've been listening to for years. The Dollop. Have you ever gone that you guys are like The Dollop? Or do you listen to The Dollop?
Yeah, I know The
ever?
Dollop. I used to listen to it a while ago.
Until your podcast became better?
No, it's funny. It's like, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but once you start making something, you engage in the thing that you used to love less. So it's like, I watched less movies because I was too busy making movies. So I'm like, I don't have time for podcasts because I got to make, it just kind of takes up your time.
Well, if there's anyone who knows about watching less movies, it's Farhan, because for a filmmaker, director, and writer, I don't know anyone who watches less movies than he
I'm
does.
watching a ton now. Now that, like, to Kaveh Taherian's point, to when you're working less, you're watching more is definitely ringing true right now.
You should also just go like Kaveh T and Kaveh M for the purposes of today's episode.
Sure. Or you just call me Hey Idiot.
I mean, Kaveh and I don't need to do it. I was gonna say it's The Dollop also meets Reply All, which was like also very popular.
Right.
Because it's always like slice of life stories and stuff too. I forgot now who it's from. It's NPR does Reply All, or did Reply All when it was on.
Yeah.
Essentially, what I love. I mean, do you want to talk about what 500 Open Tabs is about? Like, what's your? You probably have a quick log line for what your series is about.
First of all, thank you guys for having me on and letting me push my way into your show. When I heard about what you guys were doing, I was like, oh man, I wish I could talk about Iranian films, and you guys were very gracious to let me come on and talk about this.
We're excited to have you on.
Yeah. It's interesting because the show that I actually have had a couple podcasts. The one I was on before, I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. It was called Musical Splaining. That was about, I was a heel on a show about musicals where I didn't like them and my co-host liked them, and they forced me to watch musicals for like 4 years. So I've seen like every musical ever at this point.
Wow.
But when I came to wanting to start another show, my friend Hannah Hillam and I met through the convention circuit. So a lot of people might not know this, but a cartoonist is not a person who like animates cartoons. A cartoonist by definition is a person who writes and draws like together, sort of like what a singer-songwriter is. Like you're not really a guitarist, you're not really a singer, but you're kind of like a little bit of both. Yeah. So a cartoonist is like a person who writes and draws and sort of sees them as one thing rather than two separate things. So Hannah and I have very similar sensibilities in terms of how we think about stories and we have a very absurd sense of humor. And we're both I don't really like to put this forward as the qualifier of it, but it's obvious from when you listen to the show, we're both very ADHD and, we'll go off on tangents all the time, which I imagine everybody who does a podcast is on some level.
Or most creatives in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone who's like sort of got a creative bent to them, you got to have a bit of that ADHD to be able to be excited about something really passionately for the first 10% of
well,
it.
and then come up with like interesting twists, because you'd be like, this happens, and then, oh my god, this other thing is from here.
So we had some discussions, and we decided, particularly in this climate, like the algorithm always wants you to make a show that's about one thing. In this case, it's about Iranian cinema, which is I think it's great because there's literally nothing else that exists within this realm. I'm a lot more like I can maybe do that for like 6 months, and then I'll get bored and want to do something else, or it worked for the previous show because it was meant for me to be miserable. Like that was the sort of the engine of the show, is that I didn't like talking about musicals, and that's what people liked. But when it came to something that I was going to sort of be more in charge of, I was like, I'd like it to be a little bit more diverse. And Hannah and I both had a lot of tabs open on our phone. These are just, links that we had planned on reading at some point. And we thought like, okay, I'll open this thing, and then it goes away and I completely forget about it. And then I come back to it 6 months later. So the concept of it is that it covers anything and everything. But every episode, I open up a tab that I had meant to read at some point. Hannah does the same thing. We explain it to each other. We have no idea what they are before we go into it. It always is blind. And then we close the tab at the end of the show. And then we also have a function of it where there's listener emails where people share, something that they've read and they wanted to close the tab about, and then we share with our audience. So it's meant to be somewhat communal as much as it is about being kind of crazy. And because Hannah and I are both cartoonists, it goes into these very vivid, very random but visual tangents. We just kind of can't help but yes and into these stories. And so there is this almost like, I wouldn't call it like Dungeons and Dragons aspect of it, but there is like this longer thread that runs through all of the episodes of random characters that we've thought were insane based on the research that we've done, and we've sort of threaded them into some longer narrative. So it's a storytelling podcast, it's a history podcast, but it's also just a place for us to be insane. But
cool.
That was not very succinct, but
no, it's really good.
That was pretty succinct.
Okay, good.
The thing that really attracted me to your podcast, aside from the charming personalities that are hosting the show,
thank you,
was the idea that it kind of scratches my history buff. You're always like, both of you and Hannah are just kind of like finding these really perfectly, they're little oddities in like human history, or like little historical snippets that are really interesting. And it feels like these, I don't have those specific open tabs up, but it's exactly the kind of thing that I'd be like, I want to read this later on and I'll put it up. And then I never would get to. So it's like, I get to almost clear the open tabs of curiosity in my mind, and I get to close those tabs in a weird way. Your pilot episode was, you talk about like the mafia trade, like the mafia's involvement in like the underground cheese trade, I think was your pilot episode.
It was how Al Capone became involved in mozzarella cheese, the mozzarella cheese trade out of Wisconsin, and how that, through history, you realize that that's why New York pizza has like this long, stretchy texture to it, is because Al Capone literally was trying to figure out a way to smuggle drugs and all this kind of stuff. And the cheese trade ended up being what it was. And so the mob kind of went into like Jersey and New York and was like, you're going to carry this cheese now because we need these trucking routes. And then it results in, New York pizza being this own distinct thing, which I thought was so fascinating. It was such a strange connection of ideas. Yeah.
I really love, I was instantly I gravitated towards all your Iranian specific episodes because you'd mentioned in one of your episodes that like, it's really hard to find specific, interesting, odd stories that are Iranian that'd be translated in English. Like a lot of the things that would be in the cultural zeitgeist of Iranian culture exists it's hard to find. You have to mine them.
Yeah,
I think there isn't like a catch. And I think like, so Paronnaud, I don't know if you know this, but like I discovered this from 500 Open Tabs. There was a UFO sighting in Tehran in 1976.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And it became this like, there's like CIA documents on it. And it's a really fascinating story that Kaveh so eloquently goes into a great detail about, which instantly my mind, because I'm a screenwriter, Farhan's a filmmaker.
Okay.
I instantly was like, in listening to that episode, being like, is this a show or is this a movie? This can happen. I can see the plots. I can see the beats of the film going down.
Yeah. That's not an accident, by the way. That, because I have my master's in film. I worked in film for like 10 years. I still do. Yeah. I've written screenplays, like, I am a filmmaker. So I think every time, this is something that I didn't do deliberately initially, but it's sort of revealed itself to me the longer I've done the show. I'm like, oh, I'm just writing a treatment every episode. That's essentially what I'm doing.
Yeah,
I just
totally,
unintentionally.
Which I love.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, and like the Mohamed Khordadyan, the Jane Fonda-esque, like Richard Simmons of L.A. from, was that the 80s, I guess? Or
90s,
The Diary of the Shah is who's traveling by train across Europe. You have an episode on The Legend of Siavash. Like, these are really
listened to
cool.
all of them.
And
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I listened to a whole bunch. I mean, over 50 episodes in like, pretty much all, like as much as I could over the last, like, since we started talking.
Yeah.
But I really got, in the last week, I re-listened to all the Iranian ones just because I thought that you know, that we have our fan base is largely Iranian.
Yeah.
And so
is this why you haven't been returning my calls? You've just been like binge listening to
too many open tabs.
Podcast.
I was like, I'm also like, there's a recruitment for a new co-host intentionally. So like, if I hear Farhan's call, I'm like, you know what? I've been listening to another podcast, and I think it's time for me to see what else is out there. Spread my wings. There's this Kaveh guy out there who's got a great name and a great voice.
Couple of Kaves.
Yeah.
I'll do a plot summary and then we can quickly go into our reactions, and I'll have you lead the way first, Kaveh. But we thought one of the reasons you'd be a great guest to have for our episode on Persepolis is, like you mentioned, you're a cartoonist. And I'm really curious about that. Like, I wasn't familiar with PermaFriends before meeting you, and I looked up your website, and you have this amazing compendium called Mothman's Compendium of Southern Californian Cryptids. And I'm just curious about how did you get started? Like, what's like the short bio version of like, how did you become a cartoonist? Because I feel like that's something some of our younger listeners might listen to. And just like, I was terrible at drawing always at a young age, but Farhan and I were both comic book nerds growing up and big fans. And so how did you fall into, like, as an Iranian child of, I'm assuming, immigrants, like find a niche and a career in being a cartoonist?
So, you know, initially I went into I was always somebody who could draw. That was always like my personality trait as far as like in school.
So jealous.
You know, particularly speaking of being a child of immigrants, you know, I went to elementary school on the East Coast in Connecticut specifically, which is very, very white, particularly in the 80s and early 90s. And as you can imagine, having a name like Kaveh Taherian and not celebrating Christmas is not really like the thing that's going to make you the most popular person in school.
I can't imagine what it would be like to have a name like Kaveh.
Yeah, it's different times, thankfully. But at that time, you know, it's a series of different things that sort of push you one way. I think I always had it, and I was encouraged. My mom was somebody who could draw, and she really encouraged it. My dad encouraged it. I have to say, I do not fit that stereotype of my parents being like, you have to go be a doctor or an engineer. The joke I always make is that they looked at me and they're like, he's literally incapable of doing anything else, so he might as well just sort of jump on this train. But I think it was something that was reinforced a lot through school because people could sort of see me as somebody who wasn't this weirdo with a weird name and didn't celebrate specific holidays. So I think that really like pushed me more into it. And of course I just loved it, and I was like obsessive about it. So much like you guys, I grew up reading a lot of comic books, and it was something I always wanted to do. And when I went to college, I studied illustration and design and like a little bit of animation. And I think what ended up happening was I took a class on sequential art with my teacher. His name is Marshall Vandroff. He's a great guy. He's sort of been a mentor for me still to this day. And that was when I learned about how story works and story structure. And because it was something I had never really thought about. You know, I'm sure you guys have had this moment where you're like, you just watch movies. You don't really think about like how a movie is made in that sense. You're like, wow, they shoot something. But I was like, oh, I guess someone has to work out. It's not just a bunch of random stuff that happens.
Someone has to think about all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a job.
And more importantly, it's a craft. Like I had never really thought about it. So I became like obsessed with story when I took that class. And again, because I had such a great teacher. And that I thought I was going to go into animation originally. And I actually interned when I was in college. I was at Film Roman. So I worked a little bit on The Simpsons and like on King of the Hill. And I thought I was going to go that direction. And I realized I was like, oh, I kind of want to write stories more than I want to like sit and do. I thought I was going to be a character designer. So I thought I was going to be drawing like turnarounds like in space and stuff and expression sheets, which I thought being a character designer, I realized I was like, oh, I know I want to write characters. I don't want to just draw the aesthetic of what they look like. I want to do all of it.
Right.
So that ended up leading me ultimately into film because I had an idea for a pilot and a couple of stories that I started to kind of beat out. And then I got into school and I ended up going into film for a long time. But all this, what ends up happening is that I was working on this documentary for about 4 years. I was in documentary for a while. And while I was editing this doc, it took me about 4 years and I was working on it. I was like, I swear I forgot how to write. Because I don't know if you guys have ever cut a documentary before, but it's thrilling.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. And I love it. This is no shade against cutting docs because it's such a fun process. But I think I read somewhere the explanation is like, you're not writing when you're cutting a documentary. It's like someone gave you a bunch of words and then you're rearranging the words to create sentences.
Yeah. Were you working with a story editor when you were doing that, or did you have to do all your own story editing?
I was doing my own story editing, and my producer and I, we were cutting it together, and we were just having long discussions. And of course, I was showing cuts to friends and getting feedback and stuff.
Yeah.
But I was the director and editor of it along with my producer. But it sort of, I got to a point where I was like, I think I forgot how to write stories. And I was right around 2016, 2017, where this whole shit show that we're in started about 10 years ago. And I had this idea for Perma Friends, and I was like, I'm just going to kind of write this thing in my sketchbook, just kind of for myself, like just as like a little thing. And I kind of got through it, which was crazy because I'm sure you guys have had a lot of stories that you started and you think are great, and then it's time for the rubber to hit the road, it becomes much more difficult, and you judge yourself and you sort of talk yourself out of it. I managed to get through it, and I got really excited, and I ended up writing like 4 more books in that process.
Oh wow.
It just poured out of me, and I think a lot of it had to do with so much of how long it takes to do a documentary, how long it takes to do a film, to get people on board, to get all this stuff happening. And I realized that like A, I had this training from my illustration background, and B, I had this training from storytelling from film. So graphic novels ended up being this really good fit where I said, well, I can draw this story out and I don't need anybody else. Not that I didn't like working with other people, but in order to scratch the itch of getting the story out, I was able to just knock it out,
Yeah.
And so that ended up happening kind of accidentally. And I was like, okay, well, I'll publish the first book. And I published the first book, and I did one convention. I was like, this is really fun. Maybe I'll start doing this as like a little thing on the side as I do my film stuff. And it sort of came from there. And then, I've sort of continued and had a couple more books that have come out as a result of that process.
How many books have you published in total now?
Ones that I've written is 4. I've also illustrated a few. So I think I'm about 7 or 8 books, something around there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's 7 or 8 more books than me.
Let me dive into a quick plot summary, and then I'm going to throw it right back to Kaveh for a quick question, if you're okay with that, Faran.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm also okay with it.
You two have the same name. We don't have the same name.
Yeah. Plot summary for Persepolis. Adapted from the award-winning semi-autobiographical graphic novel of the same name, Persepolis follows the story of Marjane Satrapi, a bold and outspoken girl coming of age during the Iranian Revolution. As the Shah is overthrown and hope surges through her family, a darker reality takes hold. A new regime built on fear and repression. Refusing to stay silent, Margie is sent to Vienna for her family, but exile brings its own kind of hardship. Caught between cultures, she grapples with identity, loneliness, and the cost of speaking out. When she returns home, nothing feels the same. Not her country, not herself, and she must confront the painful question, where does she truly belong? It has a 96% Rotten Tomato score and a 92% audience score. So, Mr. T, Kaveh T, I turn to you. Not only what do you think of Persepolis, but tell us a little bit about how you first discovered it, being a cartoonist yourself and seeing a singular voice like Marjane Satrapi and the works. So both book and film, what do you think?
How I came across it was, what is it? It comes out in 2007, I think is the year, right? Is when the film comes out. Yeah, at that time I was living in Oakland up in the Bay Area. I was living in the East Bay, and I remember hearing about a screening that was going to be in the city in San Francisco. And that she was going to be there along with Vincent, the co-director. And I have this very vivid memory of like getting into San Francisco early, getting into line, trying to be able to get a ticket to this screening, and ultimately it's selling out, and like sort of panicking in the lobby and being like, oh no, I've let down my culture. This is like you said, a graphic novelist and a filmmaker. I was like, oh no, I'm never going to get this opportunity. And then it was really funny because this was right when the sort of touch screen, ticket kiosks were first kind of becoming popular.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And this other lady who was there who was also in line trying to get in was like, I just went over to the ticket kiosk and I typed in whatever, and it sold me a ticket, even though it said sold out, like by the people, but on the kiosk, it said it was still available. So it was like this weird loophole that we ended up finding.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So I bought a ticket and just, I didn't really sneak in, right? Because like I obviously paid for it, but I kind of was like, yeah. So I got
someone
to go
who had paid for a ticket ahead of time didn't get a seat because of you.
So I was able to go see it in the theater and then listen to the two of them talk afterwards. And unsurprisingly, she's hilarious. She's totally like has this manic cigarette smoking energy of just talking about how like, all the time she was working on it, she was like, oh, I would talk about this with Vincent, and then I would cry, and then I would smoke cigarettes and go on a walk and then come back and then cry more and smoke cigarettes. She's really funny. She's like very crackly and she's tiny too.
Yeah.
So she's kind of like this little firecracker. I was really charmed by her in person too, just being able to see her. Because I feel differently about it today than I did when I first saw it. Because it's been almost 20 years since it came out. But particularly at that time, I think the thing that is important to remember is like this movie is three things. First of all, it's based on this graphic novel about the Islamic Revolution that was a worldwide success, right? And it comes out, I think 2003 is when the graphic novel comes out. Already, that's an insane thing to exist.
Well, the graphic novel came out in two parts,
right?
Yeah, there was the first part, 2000, right?
That's what it is. That's the year that I was looking at. Okay,
right.
So it's 2000. My bad. So it comes out in 2000. I actually don't think I saw it until the re-release, the omnibus that had come out. So I didn't really become familiar with it until well into the War on Terror, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
Right. which is interesting, right? It's interesting that a book comes out at that time and kind of captures the imagination of so many people across the world. And it's a graphic novel. It's about a woman's experience. It's black and white. It's not like and now there are a lot more graphic novels that come out that are like memoirs or they're very personal stories. Like that's not a thing that everything back then was like, it's Watchmen or it's The Dark Knight Returns or some superhero based thing. So for something like this to be in that medium specifically is really strange. And it's really interesting.
Did Mouse come out before or after this? Do you guys remember?
Before.
Mouse is before. Yeah. I think that's probably the only other example of something that was popular and taught in schools specifically. I remember they talked about Mouse in some of our classes and in undergrad.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm. But even then, it's interesting because the Holocaust is something that people in the West are obviously familiar with.
Yeah.
The Islamic Revolution, Iran, being Iranian, and, actually in your case, Iranian Canadians, but being part of the Iranian diaspora, it's like we're a pariah state. Like people in America don't want to learn anything about the Iranian history or like, especially when it comes to the Islamic Republic.
Yeah.
So it's really crazy that existed. It's really crazy that they decide to make it an animated film as opposed to a live action film, because obviously and I actually read up a little bit about this at one point. Whoever the producer was did kind of want to do it as like a live action piece, but Marjane, I guess, was pretty particular about saying no, it needs to be animated. It needs to have this sort of graphic approach because it makes it more universal. It makes it less specific.
I'm so glad that she put her foot down.
Yeah, me too.
She had multiple offers from various studios, including Hollywood studios and European film studios. Mm-hmm. And she went with the French because they were one of the only ones promising to do it in animated form. Mm-hmm. But one television producer had actually offered her to do it as a TV series, in live action TV series. And he had pitched it as their version of a Beverly Hills 90210, but with chadors.
Oh my God. No.
It's a Ryan Seacrest.
I mean, honestly though, because the kids are pretty precocious and punk rock. And I was like, I kind of wouldn't mind seeing that, that take on make these Iranian young girls look youthful and alive and punk rock, it'd be kind of neat. But anyways, she said no to all those versions. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, you were going. Go on, Kaveh.
No, it's all right. And then to do it, all those things, and then to do it as a black and white animated movie is truly insane. Yeah. I think the landscape has changed so much for the better because we have so many more options now. But the idea that this comes out when it did in the aughts is it's a complete anomaly. And it gets nominated for an Oscar. It's so strange. All those things were sort of going through my head at the time of being like, I can't believe that this is a thing that I get to see. This is such a crazy exception. Mm-hmm. And it was very inspiring and it was very exciting. And like I said, she's really funny. So I have nothing but fond memories of when I saw it and enjoyed the experience. Even going back to rewatch it, just the craft of it is such like a sort of feather in our cap. What's the word I'm thinking of? It's like it's a testament to her talents, and it's something that I think culturally we should all be very proud of, and I certainly feel that now, especially looking at it. And the fact that they decided to go in a way that was so specific culturally, not only to her work, but to the work of, it looks very kind of Qajar almost in terms of its line work and its simplicity and the eyes and the way that the designs work. And that's literally the only example of that I can think of. Yeah, that really leans into it that much with a kind of Western muscle behind it in terms of animation and the style of how it's done and the craft of how it's done and the money to be able to make it to that extent. So it's still a really beautiful, beautiful piece.
Just to jump in with also an interesting fact, that she was adamant about it being in black and white, both in the graphic novel and in the movie. Yeah, because she had said that she wanted it to look like the place and the characters would not be foreign looking. They could be people from any country. She didn't want it to have this overtly Iranian looking style. So even though there might be influences of Qajar or anything else in the past, the black and white was adamantly to make it like almost colorless in culture. And it's just simply people in a country existing and just show how easily a country can become in a situation like Iran. And she had said that in the bonus features of the DVD. So she was like, well, black and white was really important to her. And like, it's just really interesting because it's very indicative of she's got such a specific style and voice in her writing and her animation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's much harder to do that too, by the way. I can tell you as somebody, when you draw line work of characters that are very simple, if you sort of adjust it, or if you got like one line wrong, or like, one circle is not quite correct, it completely throws off the style. So really, in a weird way, having it be simpler makes it much more difficult because it has to be exact.
Wow.
Whereas you can kind of fudge a little bit of other stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. There's a couple scenes in the movie where like when it shows the morality police, like when it shows the men and also when it shows the women, they all look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And at first, my 2025 brain was like, oh yeah, you create one asset and then you copy paste. And I was like, no, this is like drawn individually, and each one has to be drawn exactly the same as all the other ones from every possible angle.
Yep.
It's a testament to the talent required to do that. I want to know, Kaveh, how were you introduced to the graphic novel originally?
I think my mom realizing it like at a certain young age. I was probably just finishing high school or just entering university when the books first came out. And I was finishing high school. And I remember my mom realizing that I'm not letting go of this whole writer thing. So she was trying to like find her way into like at least infuse a love for my culture.
Right.
Via things that would be like, well, this guy likes comic books and he likes reading. So I remember like I just looked it up right now, like even reading Lolita in Tehran the book came out in 2003. Yeah. So it's right around the same time period. And I remember suddenly not only did we have all these books of Hafez and Sufism and all this stuff, but now all of a sudden my mom's like now bringing in more modern literature that are written by Iranian writers of a new generation, not older generation, not even her generation, but just younger writers. So suddenly Persepolis just shows up and it's just on the kitchen. She didn't like necessarily bring it to me to be like, here, read this thing. It's just, she was interested, like a friend of hers, a khale or someone was like, hey, you should read about it. So she bought it.
Yeah.
And then I remember like seeing it and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like this comic book. I'm like, this is clearly Iranian. What is this? And I picked it up and started reading on my own. And then I asked her afterwards, she's like, yeah, you like it? It's just kind of neat. I'm like, the story seems to end abruptly. I need to know what happens next. She's like, there's no second book yet. So I remember like at that point on, like, looking online for updates on when the second book was going to come out. I was very excited. I bought it, I think, the week.
I didn't even realize that a second book was going to come out when I read the first one. I can't remember if it says like coming soon or whatever, but I think I either thought it was canceled or I didn't know that there was a sequel coming. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know about the sequel until years after the second one had come out.
Oh, really?
And like the movie was coming out. Yeah, it was like the movie had been announced. And I saw the second one somewhere, or somebody was reading. I can't remember how I found out about it. And I was like, wait, what? There's a second one?
Yeah.
So I
feel like it was everywhere, though, in stores, too. Didn't you notice, like, for a brief... Our Indigo, which is, like, your Barnes & Noble, had... it was just, like, everywhere. You'd see that bright red cover or bright blue cover in the front of, like, authors' picks or whatever, like, bestsellers or whatever. And I just remember being like, wow, this is selling hotcakes.
You know what? It's possible that I came around to there being a second one once it came out. But I remember for a time finishing the first one and thinking that was it. But reading the book for the first time gave me like another perspective into the revolution and into Iran before the revolution. Mm-hmm. Especially because I think a lot of Iranian media is like dominated by people who were more like aligned with the Shah, like the Pahlavis. Because they were like, that's like the first group of people that left Iran, right? Like when the tide of change was coming, the people who were most closely aligned with the old government were the first to leave. Yeah. So they're the first to leave. They have the money. They can like reestablish themselves. They like set up a lot of like media enterprises in California, in Orange County and LA. So all of a sudden, all these like movies, TV shows, books, satellite TV programming, like all this stuff was being framed in a very specific kind of programming. Mm-hmm. And then when I started reading Persepolis, I was like, yo, this is like a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
And then starting to ask my parents about it, older generations, doing more research myself, and finding out that like, oh no, history is not black and white.
Ironically.
Ironically, yeah.
The graphic novel was.
The graphic
but the
novel
history
was,
wasn't.
but history was not black and white. And it was really great to see the movie acknowledges that. And it acknowledges how the same people who were rah revolution later were like, oh, we were duped, or like, oh, this did not go the way that we wanted.
Yeah.
Which felt a lot more raw and authentic and true, as opposed to like everything was perfect and then everyone went crazy and threw it all out the window. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, that's an excellent point. It was just like one of the great things about both this film and the graphic novel is how youthful the point of view is.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the like, just seeing everything go down through the lens of a small child was a breath of fresh air, because there's so much innocence to, especially in the first 30 minutes of the film. And I don't remember how much of it is in the book, but it's like she's like hearing stories of family members being tortured under the Shah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then she's like taking that information, like playing with it, like
school.
as a schoolgirl, like school
yeah.
grounds, like play. And it's just like, that's not a version you'd ever hear from our parents. Experiencing that. Even if they were to talk about some of the flaws of the Shah, they're not taking it back home and playing, let's play torture on the schoolyard.
Yeah.
So
can I just
all
say,
that is a total breath of fresh air.
Her as a child, she's so funny and charming.
Yeah.
And given Kaveh's anecdote about what Marjane was like in real life, it's like you can see the thread of how she became that, given that as a kid she was likely this like funny and charming, and like her reenacting Bruce Lee at the Mehmuni and like chasing after her cousin is like hilarious. Running around the schoolyard, so good.
I'd read in an interview, she said that she doesn't consider this a one-for-one autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
She deliberately wanted to take it from the stories of not just herself, but things that were happening around her and things that she was hearing about to construct this story. So it's like not necessarily a one. I'm sure she was a fan of Bruce Lee, and I'm sure she's a punk rock fan. But a lot of the events that take place, because I had totally.
But then, like, was she actually the nephew of like Rajar Prince or the grandchild or whatever? Like those. Yeah, those might be. Yeah.
Yeah, she said, I don't regard this as autobiographical. These are stories about what I know and what I saw and what I felt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because it's very convenient. Like, I for sure thought it was almost a one-for-one beat.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
It was Marjane too.
Yeah, I thought so too.
And so, and I think like the characters even described, like she grows, like there's like a beauty mark that grows on her nose and stuff too, which I'm assuming Marjane has in real life.
Yeah.
So you do go from thinking this is like a beat for beat story of telling your life. And I think she did use a lot of like creative license to kind of combine multiple stories into one.
I mean, it is still characterized as a memoir. I mean, I'm looking at the book here, so I think
yes, that's interesting. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing that she would do both of those things. I was like, because that's a little bit confusing. Because part of my critique of it was about the fact that we can get to that. I know that's like a part that you guys are going to get into, but that's interesting to know that changes my idea about what it is a little bit.
Okay, yeah, because I'd made a lot of notes about how family members might respond to what she was saying, but then I don't know, like the lines are blurred. But yeah, the other thing I was going to say about that I thought was interesting, Satrapi had stated that she rejects the high culture appellation of the term graphic novels and just prefers calling them comic books.
That's cool.
She thinks it's too artsy-fartsy to call it. Yeah, hoity-toity.
That's really funny.
Novels. But if either of you, Kaveh T, you might remember, I don't know why I'm saying Kaveh, I'm not talking to myself.
Yeah,
Kaveh, you might have read it more recently than I have, because like you, I haven't read it since I hadn't read it for decades.
Yeah.
So I've only seen the film recently.
Yeah.
But from my memory, the film is it's a pretty faithful one-to-one. Yeah. Like it's almost just like lifted right off the pages, right?
Is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. So I didn't read the second one. I only ever had read the first one. So it's really a lot more of it is in the second one in terms of what the adaptation is, than the first one.
Because the first one ends where she leaves Iran the first time.
To go to Austria. So all the meat of the story happens from there.
Yeah.
In terms of the film, but there's a few things that are sort of shifted around. It's not big plot points, because honestly, a lot of the book is just vignettes, right? And that's sort of what the movie ends up being, of like this thing happening and then this thing happening, and it's not necessarily, threaded in a way that is building towards a specific thing. So I think it makes it a little bit more malleable in terms of like shifting this thing, before or after. It doesn't really affect it that much. And There's
Yeah.
maybe like the only scene that I really registered as being an additional scene in the movie, as far as compared to the first graphic novel, I think is the part where she goes to see Godzilla with her grandmother, and then they go get nuts afterwards. That's an added scene. Fava beans. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking of myself here of like peanuts. I'm like, oh right, in Iran they would be eating, sweet peanuts on the street. But I think that's the only one that really stuck out to me as like a proper scene that's added, and then everything else was sort of. There's one or two things that are not in the movie that are edited out of the graphic novel, but yeah, it's pretty much one for one.
There's some stuff from the graphic novel, especially from the first one, that are not in the movie, which I feel like they do for pacing. Like the Cinema Rex fire is not in the movie.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of like the point at which the revolution tips from like just people talking about it to like, oh, now there's like, it's like wide scale protests.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was the first time I heard of the Cinema Rex fire. While I was reading it, I would ask my parents like, hey, what do you know about this? Because back then too, there wasn't much on the internet. So I would ask them about certain things, and I would go to the library and like take out encyclopedias and stuff and try to like find stuff. In the movie, it's presented as like a series of vignettes.
Yeah.
The actual revolution part is kind of condensed into a series of vignettes, which I thought was done really well. It was artistically really beautiful to show that transition from Shah to the first year of the revolution. It takes you from like 1979 to like 1981 in this little like montage of vignettes, which was really cool.
Yeah, the word vignette was something I deliberately put in my notes here because it felt actually more vignette-y than I remember the film being.
Yeah, like
And I don't know
literally,
if that
like
was-
even physically.
Yeah, like fade out and now
Fade
a
to black.
vignette will start.
That drove me
And
crazy. I'm not gonna lie. I hated that they kept
well, yeah.
fading to black. I was like, just let it play. You don't have to fade to black after every sequence.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think like as my like screenwriting brain has like I don't know if you want to say evolved or devolved or whatever it is at the state it's at now. Because I can't turn off that part of my brain. I was just like a little bit like disappointed that it was more vignette-y than I wanted it to be, just because I was really like in my head I'm like, well, what's the overarching arc to this story?
Yeah.
And we could go to like nitpicks and stuff later, but one thing I thought was like, is Marjane a character in this, or is Iran a character in this? Because I felt like Iran actually felt like more of a character than Marjane. Like there's always in screenwriting, we all know this as writers, but like you don't want your characters to be reactive to things. You want your characters to be pushing forward the action.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is very screenwriting 101. But as I was like thinking with my brain at the end, I'm like, Marjane's character, Margie, is like very much, she's just kind of reacting to everything that's happening around her, even as an adult. Even when she's in Vienna, even when she returns. And then the vignettes sort of end. And there's even like a bit of the denouement at the end of the film is just like, and we fade out. And I was even surprised that when the film ended, because I was like, wait, is there not another, we're just done?
Where's the next vignette?
Yeah. So I felt like that stuff, the structure of it was fascinating and maybe probably better suited for a graphic novel. It felt more chaptery.
Mm-hmm.
Still successful in its own right as a film, but it was just something that it irked me a bit. I don't know if I
agree with like 50% of what you're saying. I actually had the exact same note where in terms of like screenwriting, like you said, it's basically like, what's the arc of the character? How is she driving the story? Yeah. And same thing.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about it, it doesn't follow a proper 3-act structure, but if you did place a 3-act structure on it, it's like Iran is the first act, Vienna is the second act, and the third act is her return back to Iran.
Yeah.
And so that's like your sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis structure. And I think in the first act, it's like you said, Iran is the character because Iran is the one that is going through change as a country, and everyone's sort of reacting to it. It's a lot of her listening to other people tell stories about themselves without her doing anything specifically, except for, but her arc is it's a subtle one that's happening there. And like you mentioned it already, it's about her. What is it like for her to go to school? And like having heard all this information, and like, what is the effect that it's having on her as she's growing up?
Because she starts off thinking that the king was chosen by God to lead the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's her first like political opinion that she has.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I think, to me, at least as far, again, I'll preface this by saying like all the things that I love about it still stand. And this is not like we're just sort of discussing, like you said, we're doing our screenwriter nitpick OCD that we can't help but do, where you're like, the pre-chorus is too long. I need this to get to this fast or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
The music in this scene was a little long.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear the dialogue.
My favorite sequence of it is actually the Vienna sequence. This is where I disagree with you. I think that's where it's the most about her growth. It's about like her trying to synthesize her identity, not being surrounded by everybody else who's sort of telling her what Iran could have been or should have been. That's when she finally has to like put it into play. And she's like, well, I don't have my family around to back me up or to tell me one thing or another, or like my country. So now all of a sudden she's completely on her own. She's in a foreign land. Everyone's looking at her one way, and she has to make sense of like, and to me, I don't know if you guys feel this way. I'm sure you do, but that sort of taps into the absolute like emotional disaster of what it means to be part of the Iranian diaspora. Like you said, is like, it's so complicated, dude. It's like you have no idea how complicated it is. And people are like, well, the Shah was good and the Islamic Republic's bad. And you're like, no, but the Shah was kind of bad and the Islamic Republic wasn't good. And like Khomeini's bad and Khomeini, and then you're like, no, but then he said this one thing and then he lied. And then people weren't, so people were excited about this guy coming. You know, he did this. And then now you have people. So it's a mess to parse through all of that. And to try and explain it to people has been the central kind of, you know, anxiety probably of our lives, of trying to be like, dude, I swear to God, it's just complicated. And it's really hard to figure out where you sit in amongst all of that, and to get a sense of who you are and how you want people to treat you and how you want people to view you. You want to be seen as a person, but you also don't want to, but to be seen as a person separate from the politics is very complicated, because the politics, particularly for us who are all people who grew up outside of that country, like it's a fundamental aspect of who we are. It's our personalities. Like if this hadn't happened, we wouldn't be the people that we are today. We're all indirectly and directly affected by it. So and to watch her, and I think some of the best scenes in that second sequence in Vienna, and then there's one more scene that happens when she comes back. It's when she totally shits the bed and does something that is really awful to her.
Yeah,
to her
throws
lineage.
that guy under the bus.
Yeah. And then also where she lies to that guy and says she's French, which I completely understood why she's doing it. And then at the same time, like it's not the spirit of her grandmother because she's still alive, but like her conscience of her grandmother just being like, who do you think you like? Why did you lie to that man? Are you ashamed? Like, that's a thing that exists so heavily and weighs so heavily on her shoulders. I think those were the best growth moments for her.
And constantly tapping into this thing of like integrity.
Yeah.
Of like, you must maintain integrity even if it costs you your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the recurring theme of the film. And I think that plays into her journey as a character, but it also plays into the journey of Iran, right? And I think that her character in the film, especially knowing now that it's not like directly one for one autobiographical, but her character is like a reflection of the challenges that Iranians have faced on an individual, right?
Yeah.
So I'm okay with the fact that she's not beat for beat going through like a hero's journey, because I don't think that's what the film is trying to do. The film is trying to show and contextualize what it's the traumas that Iranians have lived through in Iran and outside of Iran, and I think it does an excellent job at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not disparaging when I say I didn't find that arc solidified.
Yeah,
I just
you're just
thought
talking about
I didn't think so.
brain.
Yeah, I didn't think that
the use of the use of vignettes, particularly throughout, lends itself better to a graphic novel structure than it does for a film structure, which I just thought was like a lot of what you were saying, Kaveh, was this idea of like, especially in the first half, it's a lot of her going to people who are going to tell her stories about things that happened.
Yeah.
And so those moments are very informative, especially if you're non-Iranian, to like kind of get a good Cole's notes of like the history of Iran. But they're not subtle. They're just like, here's your crash course on like 50 years of Iranian history in this like little beautifully drawn animated vignette. You know, it's not working.
By the way, through a very specific lens, like you said earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a few more things I wanted to mention that I really liked before you go to behind the scenes and trivia, but also feel free to jump in with stuff that you want to just shout out. But I really liked the grandma character a lot in this film.
Yeah.
The thing about the jasmines in her bra.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a beautiful image and a sentiment and idea, which I'll go back into later with deeper analysis. But also, when she blames the other guy when the Basiji soldier's giving a hard time and she kind of throws the other guy under the bus, and her grandmother being upset with her, that moment felt so true to me. It reminds me of one of my grandmothers. How progressive that grandmother is in her thinking. She doesn't even want her daughter to be wearing a chador in the house. She's like, take it off. I feel suffocated when I see you watching it. And I felt to a lot of it's not universally true, but I feel like a lot of people I know have at least one very progressive grandmother who was just like, you'd be surprised how liberal and like free thinking they were at that time. And like the lineage of pretty badass Iranian women who just like are like, they stand for what's right at every turn, and just like they find the Islamic regime abhorrent and stuff. It's just cool to see that in films, in any medium really. And so this is something that I really enjoyed a lot.
My dad's mom, especially, and my mom's khale, like both of them have tons of stories of them like standing up for what's right, or being like brave or defiant, or it's like it was nice to see her grandmother character, because I was like, oh, this is somebody that I know.
Yeah,
you know?
same.
Yeah, it reminded me of Sierra's grandmother in Junam, the documentary that we covered.
Yeah. I just want to call out, there's a couple things that the movie does that are kind of meta that I thought were done really well. One of them is when it shows the American earlier on in the film, in the flashback, when it talks about, well, how did the Pahlavis get into power, all this stuff.
Oh, the British
when it
guy.
shows the Americans, there's like the British guy.
Yeah, he's speaking French in like that weird accent.
Yeah, in like an English accent. I thought was so funny.
I agree. That
because it was like, because it's not like they're speaking Persian to begin with. You know what I mean? They're speaking French. So the fact that this guy is speaking French with an English accent to imply that like they're not Iranian, this is
that was really funny.
Really funny.
Yeah.
And in that same scene, the animation style, there's two other parts where the animation style is different from the rest of the movie. One of them is that scene where they're animated to look like marionettes, but like cartoon marionettes to tie into how the dad is telling the story, or the uncle is telling the story. Is it the dad? No, it's the dad. Yeah. And then the other time is when she's getting hounded by the morality police, by the women.
Yeah.
When she has the like punk rock jacket and all that stuff. They're like, they don't move like people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like their bodies are moving almost like specters or like vultures. They're like
serpentine almost.
Yeah, serpentine. Yeah, they're like slithering and all this stuff. But it was cool to see the filmmakers deliberately change the animation style and like break the reality of the film to show how these things were different.
Yeah, I love that scene too.
How did you feel about that?
It's funny, you guys had asked me to sort of prepare some stuff, and that was one of the things I wrote for one of my favorite scenes of it, just based on the animation. I think it's such a good, so like we were saying, a lot of it is one-to-one adaptation of what the graphic novel was, but not only are we dealing with a feature film that's based on a graphic novel, we're also dealing with animation as opposed to live action. So I thought that was that scene in particular is such a good example of taking use of the medium fully, because not only does it look great and interesting and beautiful, it's also like it's taking advantage of animation. It also makes a story point of like kind of what you were saying earlier, like they all look the same and they're all these sort of weird specter. They almost look like ghosts that are like stark black. They look demonic, and the way they move is so interesting, and it's so hypnotic, and it's also sort of terrifying. I thought that's such an excellent example of how to take something and really elevate it in another medium. I really like that scene a lot. Visually, I thought it's still, I think about that scene a lot, like at least like, I don't know, once every few weeks, it'll just pop up into my head and I'll just be like, you know, it's really cool.
Yeah. There was she did a talk at Columbia College in Chicago many years ago, and she said, comics as a narrative art form gave me the distance to tell the same horrible story in another way that is humorous and critical, but not cynical. And she described her biggest influences as Nosferatu, The Night of the Hunter, and elements of Godzilla, which is why there's probably a Godzilla scene.
Nice.
And like just in describing the mise en scène and like the visual style and like the black and white. And then Hamid Nafisi, who I always quote, he's a professor of Iranian film, and he's published like 4 books on the history of Iranian cinema. I always reference him. He wrote, surprisingly, all these influences are from a horror genre, as though the only film convention that could lend itself to examining the Islamization of society and the imposition of the veil was horror.
It's true. It's astute.
And then when once asked why,
but not
why
just
she
that
makes
though,
film,
like, but also the way that it was done, I think is interesting. It's like
exactly.
The way that it's not just that they converted. It was like it came in very bloodily, and it is a horror film. I think it makes sense. I think Godzilla is such an interesting. That makes sense why she would have put that in the film then, as far as like the added scene. I think that's such an eloquent way of looking at it.
Yeah.
This huge monster comes and tramples the city and just sort of like takes it over for what it wants to be. That's so funny.
When once asked why make films in exile about her homeland, she'd responded, if I were a man Iran would be my mother. I would love her even if she was crazy. And France would be my wife. I could cheat on her. I really like the quote. I'm also curious for both of you guys. Did you guys watch I'm guessing you both watched the French dubbed version?
I did, yeah.
So I didn't, because I had learned really early on in my research that Catherine Deneuve, who voices the mother, and Chiara Mastroianni are real life mother and daughter.
Yeah.
Catherine Deneuve's
royalty.
They're both famous royalty, yeah. And they did both the English and French dubs of this film.
Oh, they did the English ones too. That's so funny. I didn't know that.
Next time I watch this, I'm gonna have to watch it in English.
Yeah.
And I usually don't watch the dub version in any language. I'll read subtitles and whatever, but because it's animation and like they'll never have a perfect one for one lip to line reading.
Yeah.
I figured, hey, like you might as well do the one that was also directed by the same director directing the same cast.
That's
right?
true.
Right, yeah.
So I actually found that interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When they're speaking, do they have French accents?
Yeah, they do.
That's funny.
That's interesting.
They kind of speak with a French accent. Yeah.
That's like so meta.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, and also the funny thing too is like, because the Eye of the Tiger is sung in English too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in the English dub version, it's not really sticking out as anything specifically different because it's just voice and
I
that
totally
accent.
thought you were gonna say they're singing "Eye of the Tiger" in French in the English version.
No. It's just I feel like watching the French version because then I cut and watched. I changed the audio to watch it in French a little bit before and after, and like I feel like that Eye of Tiger scene all of a sudden sticks out that much more once you're watching the entire film in French, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she's singing
I
in
saw it
that
in
weird
French
French
in
accent. It
theaters.
was just kind of funny. So it just sort of-
Yeah.
Which again, it makes sense because even if it was in Farsi, she wouldn't be able to sing it in English correctly at that time. Or I mean, without the accent anyway. So it kind of doesn't break the believability.
Marjane had specifically in the direction of how to sing that. She kept telling the actress to. She's like, no, you're singing it too on pitch. Like you have to like. I want
do
to
it
sing
worse.
out of key. Like I would have sung this out of key. So like it's like it is pretty like off pitch and off key. Like that's a delivery. Like Marjane kept saying like no more off key. So like Chiara Mastroianni had to keep like singing it again, worse and worse, just to pitch, which I really like. It's a nice.
I have comments about this later.
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, I've already sort of dived into behind the scenes and trivia, but anything else? Let me know.
When I was reading about it, I thought something was funny. I didn't know this, but apparently in February of 2008, Iran held a series of screenings to small but fascinated audiences.
In Iran.
In Iran, quote, the aim of this screening is to end the delusions surrounding the film, which have been created by the media, said the Center's public relations chief, Mahmoud Babareza. When a film is not shown, Babareza is straight up his last name.
It's really funny.
When a film is not shown, people make all sorts of misconceptions. Cinema is cinema after all, and it should not be put into a limited political context, he told AFP. So I thought the thing that I was reading about when I looked into this that I thought was interesting is there's no mention of Khomeini in this movie.
Yeah.
There's no picture of him. There's no drawing of him in the book. There's no, despite
there's one drawing of him in the book. I do remember.
Okay.
There's one in the book.
But considering that this man was a fascist cult figure who was a cult of personality that is everywhere as a meme within that country, I think it was an interesting choice to have him be completely absent from it.
Yeah.
And I read into it. So she basically said, I left Iran twice, first in 84 to Austria, then 94 for France. And both times when I was asked, where do you come from? If you answered Iran, it would take 45 minutes of explanation. I'm an Iranian, but my father is not Ayatollah Khomeini. And he doesn't have 15 wives. I didn't want Persepolis to become political, historical, or a sociological statement. It is only my truth the way I saw it.
Yeah.
It happens in Iran, but a dictatorship anywhere in the world works the same way. You have a revolution made by idealists. It's recuperated by the cynical ones who create a climate of fear. So you don't think anymore and they can manipulate you. The same thing happened in Germany, Chile, China. The ideology might change a bit, but the mechanism is the same. I wanted to describe the mechanism because, as Pushkin said, if you want to talk about the whole world, write about your small village. So I thought that was a really interesting, because at first I was like, this might have been, and I still think there's a little bit of column A, column B. I think this is a bit of self-preservation. I think if she had made a movie where she shits on Khomeini the entire time and there's pictures of, him getting, his face getting burned or whatever, which thank God we're seeing that now in real life, which is awesome. But
yeah,
I think at the time if she had done that, I think she would have had a lot more trouble, not only getting this done, but, she would have put her life in danger.
Yeah.
But I think to lean into it as far as a storytelling mechanism and as a way of approaching the story, I thought was interesting, because I remember I wanted to relate it back to myself, which is I had done this. One of my books that I did was I did a daily strip for a while. I started it at the beginning of the lockdowns. It was just like a 4-panel comic that I was doing. It's called Avocado Chronicles. So it was like Calvin and Hobbes, but for people like in their 30s. So it was like me and my imaginary friend who was an avocado monster. And I did it every day for like basically like 2 years. I think I have like 200 something. Most weekdays, I should say. That was in America, dude. It was, I'm sure you guys know, it's only getting worse. Everything's just getting worse and more insufferable. And at that time in particular, I was like, I'm not somebody to shy away from how I feel about politics, but I was like, I need a moment where I don't think about how horrendous everything is. And I have to remember how like stupid life is and these little tiny things that are like these idiosyncrasies that drive me insane. I need to be able to make fun of those instead of the obvious ones, which is this orange-faced freak that has like destroyed everything. So it became a very important.
You're talking about Trump, not Carrot
Yes.
Top.
Yeah. I got thoughts about Carrot Top too, right? That guy is, he's not helping anybody out.
Yeah.
But
sorry.
It became like this. It's not therapy in the same way, but it does feel therapeutic where you're like, I'm just creating a space for myself to be able to make this thing where I can talk about the things that are important to me, because ultimately I don't want this to become about the person that detests so much that's like ruined our lives. And I feel like I really related to that when she was talking about she didn't want this book to be about Khomeini, because it's another example of somebody who has inserted himself into everything. And then he gets to still be a part of this. And I thought that was such an interesting decision to just be like, I'm not putting him in it at all. And I think that's punk rock. I think it's great. I think you can look at it two ways. Really cool. I lean towards that. I think it's a good choice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really like that choice. But from what you were reading, was this guy who was allowing the screenings or setting up the screenings, was he pro the film or anti the film, but still wanting to expose it for what it was? I don't understand the sentiment of what the guy was. Reza Baba or Baba Reza.
I think Baba Reza. I think I didn't go too deep into who this guy was, but from what I read in the article, I think they were like, people are chatting about this and they're coming up with ideas about what it is.
Yeah.
And we need to show it to them so they stop getting crazy ideas, which didn't really work because a year later they're.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they showed it along with a panel that like reinterpreted the film to talk about why it was like vile and like the work of the devil and all that.
Yes, and they censored a bunch of it too, of the sexual nature and all that stuff. But yes, no, 100%. The Iranian government, the Islamic Republic will still do exactly what they do. But I thought it was interesting that they did that.
Yeah, well, because at the same time there was like letters written to the French embassy from the Iranian government during when the film was screened at Cannes.
Yeah,
where it won it won the jury. It was the jury selection, official jury selection prize winner, and they were asking them to take the movie off, and they had actually pressured so many countries that the film was removed from 3 other festivals. One was specifically the Bangkok International Film Festival and the Film Festival in Lebanon too, and somewhere else. But there was enough pressure that some festivals just pulled the film right out of their screenings.
Wow.
So yeah, they once again, like we've done this 100 times. Every episode, every film we talk about, at one point we have to bring up the fact that the Iranian government tried their best to shut it down, turn it off, or whatever.
And props to Marjane for. I'm sure this wasn't easy, and I'm sure it wasn't easy to make decisions about what she was going to put in there and what she wasn't, and then putting herself out there, and the fact that I'm sure it was a huge threat to her safety at any given moment, whatever she was doing.
Yeah.
Actually, going back to our reactions really quickly, it's really interesting. One moment when he talks about how you saying that guy has a job. That really interesting moment in the film is when one of their neighbors, their husband has a heart attack and needs to have heart surgery and has to travel to Europe. And the person who's working now as the director of the hospital, who's making these choices, the neighbor who's the wife is saying we need to have surgery. He's like, he used to be our window washer.
Yeah.
And he's been promoted to the director of the hospital, who's now making a choice on whether or not this man will live or die. And it's like clearly being promoted because they're like, well, it's an Islamic Revolution. We are hiring, if you are a devout Muslim who is going to say, toe the bottom line, then that was a shocking moment.
Toe the line, the party line.
Toe the party line, yeah.
I've heard.
I don't know if you want to toe the bottom line.
Yeah. I definitely have heard stories like that from family members as well. People being like, that guy used to bring chai to us when we were at the office, and now he's somehow like in charge of all this shit. And you're like,
it's like crazy.
Of course, because like every Irani person is like, it took everything in me to not spit in his face because he's a piece of shit.
Yeah. They do. This film does a great job of like reigniting the anger. Even that moment with the Basiji soldier telling her mother off in the grocery parking lot.
Disgusting.
I'm so
You wanna
filled
punch
with
the
anger
TV
watching that.
basically when you
So
watch that
badly,
stuff.
yeah. And I'm like, how did in that moment does she not like in real life those like moments that still exist to this day? How do you not, just like lose your mind on them? There's a really interesting moment too. I guess there was a moment I couldn't find this, but this was in the IMDb thing when she's filling out a questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
The questions were all written in Farsi, but the questions that they written were all like kind of comical. So one of the lines is asking about Ferdowsi and Hafez, obviously the writers and poets of Iran. The second question asks who discovered the gravitational force. The third question asks about a mathematical symbol. The fifth or fifth question asks where Australia is located. And then one of the last questions goes, so the last question goes, where is Australia located? And it's a multiple choice. And A is in the ass, B, South Pole, C, equator, or D, southern hemisphere. So like they were literally writing in Farsi in Persepolis in the film.
Yeah.
The questionnaire that she's filling out is all like digs and reviewers. To Kunit, exactly. Yeah. They're saying that the question seems to likely be a sly dig at the level of university education in the early 1990s Islamic Republic of Iran. So like it's a little like Easter egg for like if you're catching the Farsi and reading what their things are saying, or like I can't read Farsi, but like
I can't either.
Those are all just like where is Australia located? In the ass. It's like that'd be like to Kunit. And it's just a little behind the scenes of trivia tidbit.
That's really
that was
funny.
interesting that the filmmakers decided to put in. Critical reactions. It was nominated for the Best Animated Feature in the 2008 Oscars. It lost to Ratatouille. Ratatouille is a great movie.
A couple of French movies that are running up against each other in the same year.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I never finished Ratatouille.
Oh my God, Ratatouille is great. See? I bet you Hannah's seen it.
I don't actually know. Oh no, she has seen that one because it's about rats.
It won the jury award at Cannes in 2007, and it was a nominee for the Palme d'Or. It also had hundreds of nominations and accolades across other awards. It was nominated BAFTA, Argentinian Film Critics Awards, British Independent Film Awards. This film did very, very well, very successful, and I was going to pull some like New York Times article quotes, but I felt like behind the scenes covered up a lot of territory. So yeah, that's it for behind the scenes. I mean, that's critical reactions. Unless you guys have thoughts to share about how people reviewed this film.
You mentioned some of the other stuff before, so
yeah. Okay, deeper analysis, like where we talk about larger themes here. Go ahead. Either of you guys have thoughts about themes and the deeper context, the subtext of the film?
Yeah, I can go if you want. I'm like,
Yeah,
I can
please.
always talk forever.
Yeah.
So the theme is obviously it's identity. That's what it's about. This is a movie about Iran trying to figure out who it is as a country. It's about Marjane trying on like different costumes and different identities. It's about her being like, am I a prophet? Am I like a punk rocker? Am I like a revolutionary? Am I a punk? Then she goes overseas and she's like, oh, am I French? Am I Iranian? It's basically about her trying on every different identity that she can, both aesthetically and in terms of like her own personality.
Am I a communist?
Right,
That was
am
a
I
big thing in the
communist?
first
Yeah,
half.
am I a
we didn't even touch on the
as a
communist
child?
part. Yeah.
Yeah.
My homies are God and Karl Marx.
yeah. Those are her imaginary friends.
Yeah.
It's tough being an only child, I suppose. But she's trying to discover kind of who she is in the context of somewhere that has given into its most based instincts and kind of doesn't know what it is, and how hard that is to figure that out while everything around you is kind of moving, and how some points, it's interesting. You guys brought up the scene where she says she's French when she's actually Iranian, but then also I thought it was an interesting contrast to, I think in the first sequence, or I should say the first act, when they go to school and they're like, how many times a day do you pray? And they're like 5. And then she's like, no, tell them that you pray like 10 times a day. Like her mom is telling her this. And she's sort of confused about it, where it's like, it's always this question of self-preservation.
Saving face and like self-preservation. Yeah. That scene where she pretends to be French.
Yeah.
That's like something that I've seen a lot, or I've seen people like, they'll like take on English names, or if they studied in France or whatever, and then they come to the States and they're like, where are you from? You're like, oh, I'm from France or whatever. It was good to see that addressed in the movie.
Yeah.
Because I think that as a community, need to confront that a little bit. And it is something that is there in other diasporic communities as well. Like Malcolm X talks about it in his autobiography about the Black community, about people trying to like like straighten their hair with like a chemical treatment, and they did
Sure.
it at the cost of like burning their scalp, right? Immortal Technique talks about it in his songs about a lot of people in the Hispanic community who will use the English version of their name, or they'll like
Yeah.
put in contacts or dye their hair. Like this is a thing, and I think that racialized communities need to come to terms with it, both in the sense of like challenging why we do it, but also in the sense of like maybe giving a little bit of leeway to people who did these things in order to survive, especially in like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I wouldn't know what that's about. Would you, Kevin, know what that's about? Because I, Kevin, would not know what that's about.
Tay. It's my latte name. I still do it every day. I preserve my identity and integrity when I get a coffee when I go out in public. Yeah.
No,
No,
you
I
get a
think
cappuccino when you go?
Cavecino.
Cavecino's my like that's my handle for everything, like PlayStation name or whatever.
That's funny.
I always go Cavecino. I say
Which is funny,
Cave.
I'm
Like I say,
Cavocado.
it's like Cavocado. I know Cavocado and Cavecino, but I always tell
I
people
noted
like
that.
when they ask how to pronounce my name, I'm like it's Cave, like how you might say cafe latte, but with a V, like cafe, like and that, I feel like that, or agave too is the other one.
Agave is another one.
Seems
Yeah.
to-
I mean,
Oh, that's
I think in the States, again, it's so interesting to talk to you guys because you guys aren't American. So I'm really curious as to like what the experience was that you guys heard about growing up. But, I'm in LA, I'm in the epicenter of it. And a lot of it has to do with, everybody here came and they're like, no, I'm Italian or, I'm from Northern California originally. And when I first came to LA, people are like, where's your family from? And I'm like, oh, we're Iranian. And they're like, what? And then you tell them Persian. They'd be like, oh, you're Persian. Now we know what you are. So I resisted that for a while because I was like, it's not Persia, it's Iran now. Like that's what's on the whatever.
Persian is
like,
the language.
right. But eventually I just sort of
I
gave
feel
up.
like-
I got tired of correcting people. So just was like, I'm Persian, fine. And I've fully adapted to it now. But that's like a symptom of that. I don't know if you guys experience or if your family experienced that. But a lot of that has to do with their own safety, particularly in the States, like after the Iran hostage crisis and people coming here and being like, we were all going to get, people in my family experienced discrimination directly because of it. So really it was just a way of, not that anybody in my family ever denied it. If anything, my mom made me double down more and more as I learned more and more about it. It was sort of similar to like what the grandmother's experience was in this movie.
Yeah.
Great point, Kaveh. I want to add.
Are you talking about yourself?
Yes. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to take a quick, let me just do this because we might cut this and put it somewhere else.
Sure.
I completely forgot to mention, Farn, we might put this at the beginning.
Okay.
You were in Argo,
Oh, right.
Kaveh.
You were in Argo?
That's also that's what
Yes.
connected us.
That's true.
And I think that's like a very, because you reached out to us saying, "Hey, I'm friends with Rob. By the way, I'm in Argo. He's Ben Affleck. Can you go into that? Like, why, how, and when, and where, and
Yeah.
wow.
Okay.
And why?
And why? So this was purely like failing up. That's all that happened here. So it was just this.
It's amazing.
Everything was a complete
Best way to fail.
You
complete
applied as a
accident.
janitor, and then
Yeah.
they asked you to be the executive producer.
Exactly. No. So what happened was this is 2011, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. What happened is that I had a friend who was a PA on Argo, and she's Iranian, and she was you're not supposed to do this, but she was sending me pictures because she was over in Ontario Airport, which is not in Canada, but
Ontario, California, yeah.
Ontario, California, east of here, and that's the airport that they had converted to look like the airport in Tehran. And she was like, "Dude, it's so crazy to come on the set and see these giant banners of Khomeini in this airport." She was basically like, "This is blowing my mind," and she like kind of wanted to
Yeah,
sort of get it off her chest. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is great. I wish I had saved those pictures because they're so ridiculous to see." But I was like, "Oh my God, that's so cool. Can you get me on as a PA?" Because I worked production for like 10 years. Like I was never, I'm not an actor. Like I have acted just because someone will put me here and there, but like it's absolutely not my craft. It's not the thing that like I ever really wanted to do. And I was like, "Get me in as a PA. Like I don't care. I'll just be, I'll move trash bags." I was like, I have to see whatever the hell this movie is because I also like Affleck. I think he's a good director. Like I think
sure.
generally speaking, he's had a pretty good. People got mad about the Bill Maher thing where I was like, I actually thought it was really endearing. Like he's getting all flustered and calling out Bill Maher for his bullshit.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah.
And I think he's kind of got our backs. And I was like, I trust Affleck to do a pretty good job, like within the confines of what he's going to do. So I was like, I'm curious about this movie. I'm not just saying that because I ended up being in the film. I actually did feel that. That's why I wanted to go on it. And I was like, get me on as a PA. And she's like, honestly, I can't. Like, all the PA roles are all the PA positions are filled, but we do need extras. And she was like, if you can come for like a couple of days, you can come storm the embassy. And so I was like,
that's
all right.
so funny.
So she basically had me come on. They sent us all memos beforehand, which was like, don't shave, don't clean up your beard, don't pluck your eyebrows. I wish I still had this too. It was such a funny piece of paper where it was like, we don't want to see you looking like this. And it was like the Persian dudes you see in LA.
How much time did they give you?
This was like a week or so or something, or 10 days before.
So you have like 10 days to not shave or plug your eyebrows.
Basically, yeah. And they were like, and they had examples because, so many Persian men I mean, my eyebrows aren't that thick. So this is not really a problem for me, but they're like, do not have it like super plucked. And they had example. I wish I had saved it. It was so funny. And I was like, all right, whatever. So I sort of let my beard grow out, and then I got on set, and it was like hot, and they gave me like whatever, the 70s suit to wear. I was like paired with this guy because I was supposed to be like a reporter and like a journalist. Like, we were supposed to be like, none of it made sense. It was just sort of was like filling in a bunch of, there you go. That's me.
Is that you?
Yeah.
Your Kaveh, send me that. I want to see it not on a webcam through a phone screen.
Yeah.
So one of the most surreal things I have ever experienced in my adult life is going to this film set, and there was this giant tent, and there was this guy, I think his name was Farhad. He was very sweet. He was a very, very, very nice guy, very interesting guy, very hilarious. And it was effectively like a terrorist training camp for the movie.
Oh my God.
And he's wearing, of course, so that there's no mistake about where his alliances lie, he's wearing a button-down shirt that's just an American flag so that people don't get confused. But all of us extras were like crowded into this tent. There's like, at least, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80 people in there. And he's teaching us the chants of like Marg bar Amrika, Marg bar Shah, like all this shit. And he's got it like up on this whiteboard, like phonetically spelled out. And like, he's basically teaching everybody how to have these chants. And I was like, we're all going to end up on some list. Like, we're all going to get arrested. I can't imagine what nightmare this might have been for like bureaucratic or like having the CIA or FBI be like, we're not doing this for real. It's just for this movie. Yeah. And it was so hilarious. And so for like a day or two, we're just sort of, and when you make a big Hollywood movie, you're filming over and over and over again. So we did like 50 takes of us like running in and like running into the embassy and like pulling out papers and like running outside to bang on the doors. And it was really interesting because I'd never seen a film that was that big.
Yeah.
It was really cool. So like after 2 days, I was like, okay, well, that's fun. And I thought it was over. And my friend, the PA, was like, hold on. And she comes over to me and she has this picture, and it's of that scene that I'm in that I ended up being in the film. She's like, okay, so here's the real scene, or here's the real thing that happens. It's like this press conference that the Islamic Republic gives to the press. Or these representatives, and they're looking to match the people that are in that photograph as close as they can. And she's like, you kind of look like this guy. Would you be okay with shaving off your beard and just having a mustache, and like we'll put you in? I was like, hell yeah. I was like, I'll do that, sure.
Yeah. And
we get in and they do that, and they give me the outfit, and we go into the scene. And then the first thing and like Affleck's there, I hadn't actually like engaged with him at this point. And we get into there, and the first thing he says is like, who here speaks Farsi? And like a few of us raise our hands, and he's like, okay, I'm going to give you guys lines. Like, you say this and you say this. So he just kind of comes up with a scene like on the spot. What ends up happening is because I have these lines that are delivered, I'm now Taft-Hartley. So I become SAG eligible, and I become eligible to actually get residuals. So I still get a check for like $12 like every 6 months.
That's awesome.
Nice. That's really great.
And I sign these papers. My scene gets cut. I'm in it for like a split second because like my lines got cut from it. But it's just this really insane, bizarre story. And then when I came out, there's all these people who were like, I felt really bad because some of these actors who come and they're like extras because they're trying to get their SAG cards or they're trying to get discovered. They're like crying because they didn't get to be in the film. And meanwhile, here's me, this idiot who had like no business being there, who just like failed my way into this and like still got to do it. And everyone makes fun of me. They're all just like, oh, Oscar-winning actor Kaveh Taherian from the Oscar-winning film. Like everyone, I was getting texts from family members when Argo won the Oscar, being like, "Congratulations!" I was like, "I didn't do anything."
Yeah.
Anyway, it was
that's really cool,
surreal.
and that's why you ended up being the lead of his next film. I think Ben Affleck. You were in The Accountant, right? You played the accountant after that.
I am the accountant, actually. Yeah, he had me.
Yeah. Cool, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have some deeper analysis to dive back into. We mentioned this whole thing of Marjane's imaginary friend growing up was God.
Yeah.
And I think that is reflective of Iranian society at the time being like ultra religious, ultra Islamic, trying to be super devout and all this stuff. And then immediately after the revolution, when her uncle gets executed by the new government, she basically like banishes God from her imagination.
Yeah.
Right? She denounces him, which is very similar to what happened. And we talked about this in the Hamun episode of how all of a sudden after the revolution, you have all these people who considered themselves these like devout intelligentsia of Iran are now questioning their beliefs because they're like, well, we feel like we've been abandoned and we were sold a lie.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really strong parallel.
Yeah.
With that too, just one last thing, with her using her experiences as a child to reflect Iranian society at the time, her childhood naivety and being so gullible and hyperbolic when she's like trying to convince all the kids to chase after Ramin because she's like, oh, Ramin's dad killed these people. He killed like 1 million political dissidents and communists and whatever with his bare hands, blah, blah, blah. It again also is like a reflection of society at the time, of Iranians at the time who were becoming more and more hyperbolic against what they perceived to be their enemies.
Yeah. I think also the fact that both of her imaginary friends were God, it was just, and
Karl Marx.
Right. And the idea that was a delusion for her and that was like her imaginary scenario, which I think is a metaphor of like, yeah, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have like a religious society that's communist. I wonder if that's probably what that was trying to say at the time. I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's interesting. My deeper analysis about breasts. I want to talk about women's breasts for a second.
Go on.
And just this idea that the grandmother, again, like she keeps flowers tucked away, jasmine flowers in her breast because she asks, "How come you smell so good?" And she's like, she describes how every night if they ever like slept in a bed together, when her grandmother would disrobe, the smell of jasmine filled the room. And I just think the image. Like that beautiful image of like a bare-breasted woman in concert with flowers and like beautiful flowers and a fragrance and smell juxtaposed against what is happening in Iran at that time. Where cover up your rusari is too high up, so cover it down so it comes down to your like but juxtaposed with the idea of a naked woman and a naked elderly woman at that, but being combined with flowers, I thought was a really beautiful kind of contrast compared to what's happening, and probably a very purposeful use of that moment. Like I just think it's like you reveal the breasts and out come flowers. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's a really nice sort of like deep.
It's a beautiful image
there.
too, and I think kind of what you're talking about earlier is like, in the West you would think of the punk rock version of it is like you punch this person in the face, or you light this thing on fire, or like you tear down like it's very, for lack of a better word, but like male and aggressive. But kind of one of the other central themes of this is femininity, and because it's all about controlling femininity and controlling women and controlling their bodies and controlling how they're able to show themselves, and to have this, it's a very delicate moment in the story, and it's one that's repeated at the end. That's like that's the ending of the film. I think is this really interesting act of kind of punk rock, to the spirit of what it is. Like that's the middle finger. The middle finger is her just saying like, I'm going to talk about breasts in cold water, like you said, in an elderly woman. I think it's an interesting way to think about how you rebel, and it's not always the most obvious aggressive way. It could be something as simple as talking about your grandmother's bosom.
It's the flower the hippie put in the gun in that popular image from Your American History. The hippie putting the flower in the gun.
Yeah. hippiegun.jpg. There's a moment towards the end of the movie. There's like two moments that are kind of almost back to back. One of them is after Marjane gets arrested when she's out on a date with her fiance, essentially, right? At that point, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. And then the dad comes and like bails her out. And as they're walking home, the dad says, when your mom and I were teenagers, we'd walk these streets hand in hand.
Yeah.
And line hit me really hard.
Yeah.
Like I had to like pause the movie because I was getting really emotional.
Yeah.
Because that's not an experience that people in the diaspora will ever have, one.
Yeah.
And two, even people in Iran are like, they can kind of have that that experience where they're walking the street, but they can't do it freely in the way that their parents did it. So they're almost like a prisoner in their own country. And then for us, we will never be able to walk these streets that we grew up in and know that like we have history here, we have roots here, we have family here. You know what I mean? And it seems mundane, especially for people who grew up in that environment. But to know that like you go to school with people who are like, oh yeah, my parents went to this school, or like my grandparents lived around the corner from here growing up. We don't have that. We will never have that.
Yeah.
And then the next scene, it's like a few scenes later when she mentions that was the last time I saw my grandmother, and she's like, but that's the price we pay for freedom. Just the thought of like how many grandmothers never got to see their grandchildren, how many grandfathers never got to see their grandchildren, and grandchildren see their grandparents. People growing up in a land not their own, don't have roots, and will never see their family is just, it's heartbreaking, and it hits really hard, and I'm glad that they included that in the film.
You have an interesting point, and it kind of reinforces that, which is so much of the acts of defiance in this, or the things that you wouldn't think to look for, are those subtle things. Like, like you said, like it is a crazy line to think about. Like your mom and I used to walk through the streets like hand in hand, and like people in Iran just don't know what that's like. Also, think about what a crazy. Do you guys ever see In the Mood for Love? The Wong Kar-wai movie. It's like that entire movie is sort of the similar idea of like, oh, we can't even like have like like fingers touching because it's like so oppressive.
Taboo.
I mean, sorry, taboo. That's what I'm thinking of. Although for that movie, it's a very different reason.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to think like to be robbed of that, of such a simple kind of like base experience of courtship and of love and of wanting to connect with someone is so. You think you hear about the horrors of what happened, but you don't even think about the smaller things and how like that's how your humanity's stripped away even further. It's one thing to be like you're gonna get shot, but it's another thing to be like I can't even hold someone's hand. It is tragic.
Have you been to Iran?
I went one time when I was like 7 years old. This was like 1990, I think. And it was like 10 days. I was really little. I got sick. I do remember like hanging out with my cousins and having fun, but it was a lot, man. Especially that's Iran, like after the Iran-Iraq War. I was a kid, and the culture shock was very big. But I don't really have very like a lot of memories about it. Again, because I got like I got straight up like traveler's diarrhea, so it wasn't in that sense. It wasn't fun. Oh man! But and I remember telling my mom when I went, I was like, "Why is everyone crying?" Because like no one had gone back for the whole time. So it was just my mom, my sister, and I. And everyone's crying because they're like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in like whatever, 15 years or something.
Right.
And so like as a 7-year-old, I was like, this is kind of creepy. Like everyone's talking about how like that building exploded. I'm sick. This person's crying, and this person's, every time we go to someone's house, someone's crying. They're obviously crying because they're excited and they're emotional because they haven't reconnected. I was too little to really understand it, but I remember it being like very intense. Yeah. And of course, Iran's a third world country, especially at that time. It's like barely being rebuilt. So I was like, what the hell is this? Where's the Nintendo? Like, what is this TV? Like there's, I'm kind of I don't have experience with that. So, but I do remember connecting with my cousins when I was there, and that was really fun. And that was like a different experience, but that was the only time I ever went. I really, truly to this day, I still wish deeply in my bones that I could go back and sort of travel unmolested and unattacked and not worried for my safety. There's so much I want to see. There's so much history I need to see. There's so much I want to experience that I feel like has just been absolutely robbed of us. And it's like the central tragedy of our lives that has defined so much of what we do and why we do it.
Yeah. We often end up talking about this exact same thing every episode. Like we just can't end up escaping the fact that we like watching these films and thinking about the past always brings us back to this like nostalgia for a life that we haven't lived yet. Yeah. Which sucks.
Nostalgia for a life we never lived is such a, like, that's a very poetic kind of like irony of sorts of like what it means to be here. And I think diaspora is one thing, and I don't know if you guys experienced this, but like the friends I always made growing up were always people who were like, oh, my parents also were born in a different country, like, and it didn't really matter. I think the term is third culture kids, so it's like people who grew up in a country that they were not native to, but their family is from, so they end up forming a different culture altogether. It's a third culture. Your culture in your home is different from the culture that you live in.
Du Bois calls it double consciousness, the same thing.
Double consciousness.
But yeah,
that's cool. But our experience, I think Iran in particular is so specific, at least here in America, where it's like, I think I said this earlier, it's like we're the pariah state, right? Iran is the pariah state. It's not the ability to travel back and forth to that country. There's only a couple of them in the world where you're like, it's a bad idea to go here. Like Iran is one of them. It's like whatever, North Korea, Cuba's like lightened up a little bit in terms of being able to access it, but it's such a specific experience for us. I think that's so much harder in a way because a lot of it ends up just living in your imagination more than anything, or just like bits of what other people tell you or you can find.
Yeah. These talks always make me so sad.
Debbie Downer stuff.
Kaveh, do you need a moment?
No, I need a moment.
No, I've thought a lot about this. It's something I think about all the time.
Yeah. I do need a moment. Can you leave the room, actually? All right, let's go. Best scene. Shall we go best scene?
Yeah, let's do it.
Kaveh, why don't you go first? What's your favorite scene in the film?
I mean, I think we covered it a little bit. So I loved the morality police sort of serpent animated, demonic part. I thought that was great. Also, obviously, her favorite scene is the one with her grandmother talking about the cold water in the breast with I think it's jasmine flowers. I love both of those. I thought those were very poignant for different reasons. One being taking great advantage of the medium of adaptation of a graphic novel into something animated, and the other being something that is very poignant and beautiful and an act of defiance in a way that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
I think that's probably it. Yeah, I think I've already sort of mentioned what I loved about it, so I can talk about a bunch of other scenes, but those are the two that stuck out to me still.
I will just add, for me, it's the Jasmine, in the bra scene. I really like the Eye of the Tiger montage scene. Just it kind of it comes after a long, rather sad moment in the film, and it's the uplifting. I felt the energy of that scene. I also really just want to add the animation of when puberty hits her. It was really funny.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
How she grows taller and her nose gets bigger. I thought that was just from an animation point, it was one of the more standout moments. Transform into this ogre. And then a slight shout out to the contraband scene when she's walking down the street, and it's Stevie Wonder,
Jekyll Maxon.
Yeah, just Jekyll Maxon. It was
Jekyll
so
Maxon. Jekyll Maxon is that's in the graphic novel.
Yeah.
I remember reading it and being like, "This is hilarious."
Yeah. All right, fine. You go do it.
Also, that to yours, Kaveh, the contraband scene when she's haggling with the guy.
Yeah, over the Iron Maiden.
So 60.
And he's like 100. She's like 50, 60, 50, 60, 50.
Yeah.
Chune.
Yeah. Chune Buzzy.
It's a tie between two of them, and I mentioned both of them. One is the recap of the Pahlavi history.
Yeah.
I liked how that was done, and I actually liked it. It's interesting. This covers parts of it that the Argo recap doesn't at the beginning of the film, and vice versa. So I feel like if you were to give somebody a decent recap of early or I don't know, Iran from 1900 to the 1950s, that's a pretty solid 1-2 little back-to-back scene to show them.
Yeah, because it goes back to Qajar dynasty too.
Yeah.
It goes pretty far back.
Yeah. And then the other scene that I really liked, I liked the one montage of vignettes. It shows little spotlights on the screen.
Yeah.
Where people being like, "Oh, I heard from so and so that this person was arrested today." And then it shows the uncle in another part of the screen being like, "This is this is normal to all revolutions."
Yeah.
And you slowly start to see how the first year, the months leading up to the revolution and the months following the revolution, how Iran really changed. And it's done in a 10-second sequence, but it's done so effectively. And it almost felt very much like a play. How sometimes in plays you'll get that, where you'll have different actors standing on different parts of the play, and the spotlight will turn on and off to get actors to kind of monologue what's been how there's been a passage of time.
Yeah,
it was good.
Yeah. Damn, that's poetry. Where we talk about our favorite lines from favorite line from the film or favorite quote. I want to go first in case one of you guys took mine. I want to say it.
Yeah, I wrote down 3, so you go ahead.
I don't think you guys probably. The one that hit me the hardest in the entire film was towards the end when she's returned from Vienna and she's trying to start her life, and the exact quote is, "In a desperate quest for happiness, we ended up forgetting we weren't free."
Nous recherchions tant le bonheur que nous finîmes par oublier que nous n'étions pas libres.
Yep.
That's when they're trying to talk about how they're trying to have the party life and they're trying to just kind of dance and go to clubs and ignore it. That hit pretty hard. I felt I felt the weight of that sentence. And Kaveh, go for it.
Yeah, probably that one.
Yeah, same here.
That's the one that stuck out to me quite a bit too. It's like these nice little poetic moments of it.
Yeah.
But I think
Great.
I was more enraptured with the visuals than the specific lines. Like the dialogue didn't necessarily, with the exception of stuff like that, but it wasn't like a super quotable thing. I think it was more visual. Oh, I guess
For sure, yeah.
maybe because that's my drawing background, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Farn, June?
There's one little quick one that I just want to mention. There's a moment where the mom says, whatever happens next, it can't be worse than the Shah.
De toute façon, ça pourra jamais être pire que sous le Shah.
And I was like,
Dun, dun,
the dramatic
dun.
irony of it.
Yeah.
Especially because I hear people say stuff like that. Like when the Zanzandigi Azadi movement was starting, and hearing people that it was like people who were like never really politically activated all of a sudden being like, yeah, at all costs, we have to do this, this, and that. You're either with us or you're against us, or if this person's our ally, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you need to be very cautious with which allies you draw on.
Yep.
And people are like, no, well, like, if the enemy of our enemy is our friend and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And it made me think of this thing of like, whatever happens next, it can't be worse than the Shah. People were saying to me verbatim, whatever happens next, it can't be worse.
It can always get
than
worse.
This
always
regime
get worse.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Okay, the other one is the grandmother says this to Marjane and also to the fava bean guy in a lot of ways. The grandmother says this in response to the idea that the guy with the heart problem developed a heart problem because of the smoking.
Yeah.
She says, it's not because of the smoking that he's this ill. And she says, all children grow up and move away. That's normal. But being separated from them when they're only 13 or 14 because of an absurd war, that's enough to break anyone's heart.
Les enfants finissent toujours par partir, c'est normal. Mais être obligé de se séparer de ses gosses quand ils n'ont que 13 ou 14 ans à cause d'une guerre absurde, ça briserait le cœur de n'importe qui.
And that was, again, one of those scenes that I was like...
Thank you, Farn, June. Favorite performance?
I liked Uncle Anush a lot. I liked the design of that
Yeah,
character.
he
I
was
like that
really-
whole little
yeah.
sequence. He's definitely very like. There's something kind of hypnotic about that character and the way he's presented.
He's the one
and
with the
way he's-
mustache, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the mustache and like that cool,
Yeah.
weird like.
He looks like Kayhan Kalhor,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he does.
doesn't he?
But like older, but like with the white hair. It's sort of like that. What's the word I'm thinking of? It's like a collage of pieces that form his hairstyle, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Played by Francois Jerosme, Jerosme.
François Jérôme.
Jérôme.
Jerome.
François Jérôme. I liked it.
François
Obviously, the
Jérôme.
grandmother was great, but I think, I think Anush's thing was pretty interesting, and I liked that whole sequence of him, going on the walk forever, and then he's like putting on the disguise. Like he was an interesting character, and he's there for such a limited time, and he has such a big impact on her
Yeah.
and in the story.
That's a great call.
Yeah.
That's a great call.
Mine's the grandmother, played by Danielle Darieux.
Oh.
She, I thought, was really good, and every
She's very
time
good.
she had a line, I was just like on the edge of my seat listening
Yeah.
to every word that she said.
Surprised, no one else. I'm gonna go with Marjane. I think she like carries so much of the emotional weight. Chiara Mastroianni. It was just like
Yeah, she was
I really
great.
liked it. Lots of life to that character, and I really felt the punky angst of her, both in English and French.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, great. Festival of Cons, where we bring up any of the nitpicks we have throughout the films. We've obviously touched on some of them. I would just add, I would just kind of highlight that idea of it's just the little bit of the narrative nitpick I had was like the vignette style that kind of put her in a lot, especially in the first half. It's like people, like you said, Kaveh, a lot of people explaining to her what happened in Iran versus hearing a story about a young girl. But again, this is a small nitpick, to be honest. So
Yeah.
that's all I'd really have to say.
Yeah.
It's minor.
I kind of discussed earlier the problems I had with some of it, but really it's like, if I had to, it's kind of thing. But I think this thing is, I'll say this though, like a note that I'd written earlier that I didn't get to mention is like, part of the reason why I'm fine to just let this be what it is and not nitpick it to death is because as far as options are concerned for people in the West to see a movie about something like this It's basically like it's like this and I don't know, Not Without My Daughter, basically, are like the only options, and then like Argo.
Yeah.
That's it. Like there's
Yeah.
only, and this is a big case for diversity in film. Is not just because like we want to see brown people in Star Wars, which is cool, but like it's like no, we've seen so many movies about World War
Hey,
II
Ezra Bridger is now played by an Iranian.
Yeah.
in Star Wars.
Yeah, we have an Iranian Jedi.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
No, again, to be clear, for people, because everyone online gets mad, this is not about saying we shouldn't have brown people in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'm saying that like the kind of diversity that I mean is more like, can we see like more movies about stuff like this?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't, because if there's only one of them, all the pressure goes on this one film to sort of be everything to everybody, which will ultimately result in some sort of failure.
Totally.
But I think what's so interesting about this is that her perspective on this, she kind of is like, I don't give a shit. I'm just going to make this movie about my perspective and my thing and my family's political ideology and sort of how I experienced it, which I think took a lot of balls to do, and it's tough.
Yep.
And even though there's a lot of it that I'm like, I don't necessarily agree with this part or like this interpretation of it, you got to recognize the audacity it takes to do that and reward her for it. And I think whatever criticisms I might have are basically because nothing else exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't seem fair to really get into it because it's like, well, this is what we want. So we got to sort of throw all of our weight behind stuff like this so that there's more of it. And then if we're in a position where we're like, cool, maybe we can finally get a movie where, they've made so many of them that finally you make a movie about, whatever was the movie about, like, there's so many World War II movies that they finally made one about, like, what was it like for Hitler? Like, I think you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, you guys, because you've made enough of them.
Right.
Like, there's other stuff that's happened in the world, and this is certainly not an event that was small. This is an event that affected everybody.
What about Hitler's chef? What was
Right.
he cooking?
Hitler's dogs. What was it like for them?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you said about the vignette thing, like, I just want to differentiate. I liked it in that one montage where it was fading in and out and the little like spotlights on the screen. I really liked it. But as you guys had mentioned, a lot of scenes end with fade outs.
Yeah.
Which I think it could have just been a hard cut.
Yeah.
And it would have been like fine.
It stops tension from building.
Yeah. Which makes me think that like maybe those moments were like animated and edited in isolated segments or in isolated like beats, and then those pieces were all slotted together. Because if you were to watch those segments as like a short film, right, then I can understand wanting to like have like a fade in and fade out. But in a larger film, like in a theatrical film, I think it actually messes with the flow and the pacing a little bit.
I agree.
But it's such a like minor nitpick. And then my other nitpick, and I was holding back on this because it's something that Kaveh loved. I hated
Which Kaveh?
the singing of the Rise of the Tiger part.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, and I've always hated it. And I understand that it's like a deliberate choice to make it sound intentionally bad. But this is like my third or fourth time watching the movie. This time when the Rise of the Tiger scene came up, I literally skipped the scene.
You're like, ugh.
I like did not have the hostility to listen to bad singing.
Kaveh, Farn is the anti-music one in our group. He doesn't like musicals and he doesn't like them.
Yeah.
So
I'm also the only one in this group, maybe, who has composed music for film. So
I mean, I'm with you in that I did not like hearing it be out of key. It's like nails on a chalkboard to me. I understand and appreciate what they're doing, but I also found it difficult because of how off key it is.
I loved
agree
it.
with you.
I loved it.
Okay. Glad I'm not alone on this island.
It's beauty in the cracks of things. Like Leonard Cohen said, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in.
You know what? I feel like I enjoyed it the first time I saw it, like that montage.
Yeah.
But it's once you're like on your like third or fourth rewatch of this film, that scene, I'm like,
I get it.
all right, next scene, please.
Can I ask you this then? Because there's one other like small nitpick I have is I feel the movie ends pretty abruptly. Do you guys? You don't feel that way, either of you? Because it like that child running from the party and he jumps from the roof happens like 5 minutes before the movie ends.
Yeah, it does seem a bit.
It's just kind of like the child dies and then she's like, Nima died yesterday. What? We have to leave. And then it's like a quick thing of like them leaving the airport and seeing their parents, and that's it. It's like fade out. I was like, whoa. Like we didn't even have like a slow kind of like I mentioned denouement. Like it was just kind of like and point like there's a story. But maybe that's just me. Maybe if I'm the only one who felt that way.
No, I think
Maybe
it leads back to the same thing that we're talking about, the vignetting. It's like the fading to black over and over and over again, sort of like it gives you this double take, so it seems confusing. I think when it
Yeah,
happens, I think it like disrupts the pace of it, so you don't necessarily get the sense that something's actually ending. It feels like a false ending, and you're like, oh wait, actually it is. But they do the quote again at the end about the breasts in the water with the flowers. So they do kind of a denouement there in that sense.
Yeah.
Double feature lineup where if you were going to be programming a double feature at theaters, Kaveh, what would you pair this movie with?
So this one was a tough one for me to get right, because I think about it as the graphic novel primarily, and then the film.
Totally.
It's funny because the graphic novel I think of that reminds me of this or feels like in the same vein is unfortunately not a movie, but it's a TV show. But the TV show was not that similar to what the graphic novel was in the way that this almost feels like an exact adaptation of it.
That's
Game of
good.
Thrones?
We could hear. I want to hear
Game of Thrones, right? No, but I was gonna give a shout out. Do you guys ever read American Born Chinese?
Oh, I
Did
know
you read
the
it?
show. I didn't know there was a book. I know the show.
The show is different. The show is interesting. It's just like the graphic novel feels much more like small and personal and like a memoir kind of thing. I really like the graphic novel a lot, and it came out around the same time. It was in the aughts, so I would have that as the pairing. I know the question's about a double feature, but
Oh no, that's cool.
double graphic novel would be my suggestion there. But the show obviously wouldn't pair with it. The first option I thought of to think, okay, so I'm gonna have three options for you. So there's one that's that.
Yeah.
The second one, as far as a graphic novel that's adapted into a film that is not tonally the same, but I think kind of is about a historical event that is that's comedic. That was a graphic novel. Did you guys ever see Death of Stalin?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
Death of Stalin's based on a graphic novel. It's
That's a graphic novel?
I didn't.
Yeah, that's crazy. The people are like, what?
That's
And then
wild.
Armando Iannucci is the one who adapted it, who's the guy who made Veep. So it's like Veep.
Yeah.
But what if Stalin died, and how does everybody? It's hysterical. It's amazing.
Who did the graphic novel?
It's written by a guy named Fabian Nuri. But I think seeing that is interesting to be like, again, most of what people think of with graphic novels and comics is like superhero stuff. But to be like the death of Stalin was a graphic novel seems insane. And so I think that's kind of cool. And it gives you some way to go with
Sorry,
it.
was it comedic?
Yeah.
Like the graphic novel?
I mean, not to the extent
Like
that the Armando Iannucci
the
one
film.
was. I think he really took it and made it his own. But yeah.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Cool.
And then
That's
the other
cool.
one I thought of course, visually is just Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night. I was like, sort of a lot of what it reminds me.
Yeah.
It's like a one-to-one almost.
Yeah, black and white, female lead, punk rock vision.
Yep. It's very similar.
Yeah.
I feel like you're kind of watching the same thing, but like live action versus animated.
Yeah, I buy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of depends on what kind of party you're trying to throw, what kind of evening you're trying to host.
I had three. One of them was A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which Kaveh eloquently described. The Breadwinner, the 2017 film, was the animated film by Nora Toomey. Also, like I think Angelina Jolie's an EP on it, but like kind of a similar vibe of like an animated Middle Eastern story with female lead. And then the other one I have is Chicken and Plum, which is the only other movie this pairing of Vincent Paronnaud and it's the other book, the graphic novel, but they've adapted into a live action film.
Yeah.
So it's like you could have a Marjane Satrapi double feature billing night of
true.
Persepolis and
That's
this,
cool.
and that could make like a fun night.
And then if I did double feature, I would even say like this movie is kind of like there's three short films that each touch on a different period of this movie. The first part where she's a kid in Iran during the time of the revolution and the war is definitely like I'm trying to remember. The second part of the film where she's like a student abroad is a lot like Motherland. And then the stuff at the end where she goes back to Iran and as like a young adult is very similar to a short film called The Shadow of My Life. Have you heard of this, Kaveh?
No.
Either Kaveh? It's by Hajar Moradi, and it's an animated film, and it's very similar in style to the to this film. But if I was to straight up be like, all right, pair a feature length film with this, I'm going with I'm Still Here. It was the best picture winner, it was the best foreign language film winner in 2025.
Yeah.
And it's all about the fallout of like the coup d'etat in Brazil.
I didn't see this. I heard great things though.
I haven't seen it yet either.
It's so good.
Can this be a modern Hollywood remake? I say no. Preserve it as it is.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
do the
too
90210 TV version.
Do the Disney live action remake down the line.
Yeah, seriously, CGI. No, I think kind of to my point of earlier, rather than redoing the same things, there's only like 3 of these. So why don't you just make a different one? Give it a different perspective.
Well, she helped curate this like anthology of books in like this omnibus called Women, Life, Freedom. They could
adapt any of
do
those.
like an anthology feature film, where they adapt all the short films in that. That'd be cool.
Final thoughts and grades. I'll give it an A. I think it's like a standard. It's an outlier. It's a beautiful oddity. It's a strange piece that sticks out from everything else in Iranian cinema. It doesn't get quite the A+ or A++ for me because I reserve those for like true, undeniable masterpieces. Personal taste, I like it a lot. I think it's really, really good. A is me being the strict parent here and being like, there's some things that I feel like whatever, but like I thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie, and I really liked it more watching it after a decade or two has gone by, and then really felt the impact of the film. Beautifully written, beautiful images. A for me.
See, for me, it's funny because I do feel that the movie in a lot of ways is a little bit of a masterpiece, given what the movie is trying to do and the medium that it's in and the impact that it has and how it tackles the themes and the messages that it tries to tackle. I think it does it effectively. I think it's very moving. And for that, that's why I would give it an A+.
I would say an A for the similar reasons what Kaveh was saying. It's not my favorite movie ever that I want to rewatch over and over and over again, not simply because of taste. I tend to be a little bit more absurd and comedic in terms of the things that I really love. No fault of the film itself necessarily, more just in terms of like what my own tastes are. And I think it does part of the subject matter just by design doesn't make it like repeat watchable. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
It is
it's
depressing. Like it's emotional. It's depressing. It's not a thing you can throw on over and over again, which isn't necessarily how you judge a movie of whether or not it's repeat watchable in terms of its grade. But there's nitpicks. I don't think that it's the fault of the film as much as it is the fault of the system in which a film like this can only come around once every 20 years.
Yeah.
And considering how rare it is still to this day, to the extent that it is, you got to give it, good marks all the way.
Yeah.
But we're nitpicking about A versus A+ as opposed to like, it's not like a B-. If you really wanted to get into it, you'd be like, oh, she's not that active as a character driving the story, but that's not the point, and blah, blah, blah. But yes, I'm a believer in like stuff like this. Like you got to support it full-throated no matter what.
Great. Yeah. So that means that the Cinema Rex show average score for Persepolis is A.
It's rare for a writer to adapt their own book for the screen. Rarer still when the book is a comic, and yet rarer still when it's autobiographical. Aside from a select few, Frank Miller, Joe Hill, Stephen King, few authors have taken on the challenge of translating the intimate language of panels and frames into the immersed world of cinema. That's what makes Persepolis such a remarkable achievement. It isn't simply preserving her story, she's preserving her voice. The film remains fiercely loyal to the tone and texture of her original work, which means being loyal to the life behind it. A life defined by a constant negotiation between the personal and the political, a dynamic that Iranians know intimately. What unfolds is a narrative where the ordinary and the historical are inextricably linked. A quiet scolding from a disappointed grandmother, a young man's death at a party, an insult hurled in a parking lot by a regime enforcer. Each becomes a lens through which we grasp the full weight of growing up in a society undergoing violent transformation. By the time the credits roll, we feel as though we've read Satrapi's private journal, shared her adolescence, and watched her reckon with identity, exile, and resistance. That Satrapi chose to render this journey in stark, stylized animation, sharp silhouettes, angular features, a visual language both simple and emotionally complex, is all the more daring. And yet, it works. There's a distinctly French sensibility at play here, intellectual yet irreverent, caustically witty, and brimming with irony, proving she has deservedly earned her place in Iranian literature and cinema. Kaveh, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode to discuss this film so eloquently and
thank you, Kaveh.
Teaching us so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Where can people find your work? Feel free to plug away.
Thank you guys again. It's been a pleasure, and it's really awesome that you guys have this show. It's a really wonderful resource for people who may not have been exposed to a lot of these films to be able to have some context for them. So I'm so happy that you guys do this. And so happy
thank you for saying that.
To have me
Thanks
on
so
here.
much.
We young Iranian pups, although I'm not really young anymore, we got to stick together and pimp each other out where we can. And if something like this had existed when I was a kid, I think I would have had a different idea about films altogether. It's so cool to be able to put them in context. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
My podcast is called 500 Open Tabs, like you mentioned. We're on...
It's a great podcast.
Thank you. It really means a lot too. We're on whatever, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all that stuff. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you should be able to find us. We release an episode every Wednesday. Furthermore, if you want to learn more about my art and my books, my Instagram handle is PermaFriends, which is also the name of my graphic novel series. I've got a few different books that I've published. One is the PermaFriends graphic novel series, and then you mentioned the Mothman's Compendium, which was the joke with that one is Mothman comes to Southern California to find other cryptids, and he ends up writing a travel guide. Which
that's amazing.
By the way, I wanted to shout out for you guys in this. One of the neighborhoods that he comes to is Westwood.
Oh, nice.
So of course the monster or the cryptid that he finds here is the Seymour.
Nice.
Oh wow, that's so beautiful.
Sick.
Oh my god, that's really
beautiful.
amazing.
Thank you.
Oh,
I like the
that's so
billboard
cool.
too in the background. That's cool.
Yeah, Zen. So the gag with that one is he comes to Westwood and he finds the Seymour, and like the joke with it is that, like, you know, they say the Seymour has lived like 3 times and it's been around for like the entire history of existence and it knows everything. So the story is that I wrote in here is that like the Seymour comes with the Iranian diaspora as they flee Iran and come to Westwood, and it uses all of the knowledge of the world that it has to help everybody get their master's or doctorate degree. So that they can become
that's really funny.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a bunch of fun stuff. I got books and prints and stuff, and my website, obviously, Kaveh, you'll probably like this, is blacksmithfilms.com. Blacksmith, of course, being a reference.
I know what that's about. Yeah. I was jealous I hadn't thought about it for myself.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't
like
belong to me, but thank you. I'm wearing the shirt of it, and I thought it was a fun thing. If you don't know about the story of Kaveh the blacksmith, it's a good one. Maybe I'll do a proper episode on it at some point on my podcast. But I think that's everywhere you can find me. Yeah, I'm also on Blue Sky, but it's not really as art or Iranian centric necessarily. But PermaFriends on Instagram, 500 open tabs on YouTube, and either one of those, I think you'll be able to find my website, blacksmithfilms.com, if you're interested in purchasing any books or artwork or anything like that. But yeah.
Farhan, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast. I know you had a busy schedule, but it's always great to have you as a guest.
Thanks, Kaveh.
You know how I
it's
feel
a
about
pleasure
you.
to be here. I love everything you do with the Cinema Rex podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's an inspiration to me and my life. And
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. You can find us on Cinerex Podcast on Instagram.
Like,
all one
comment,
word.
subscribe,
Yeah,
share
why
with your
not? Do all those
friends.
things. Who
Yeah.
cares? And to everybody else, be omid didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.